Thank you, Hom.
All right. Thank you, Mansi. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We are excited that you're able to make time to go over this important topic, DevSecOps, how to reduce risk from supply chain attacks. So let's get started. So I'd like to start with an eye-opening data point. This is data point from Gartner. Gartner says that that by 2025, 45% of organizations worldwide will have experienced attacks on their software supply chains. And this is a threefold increase from 2021. So this is pretty eye-opening. So the number of software supply chain attacks is increasing on an ongoing basis. Last month, the White House in US released a new US national cybersecurity strategy. This is a framework that seeks to protect critical infrastructure, including hospitals and clean energy facilities, etc., from cyber attacks. This is basically an effort by the US government to increase cyber and technology governance. And the purpose is to boost privacy protections and to ensure fair competition online. So this is a significant development that happened in US. And as you can see, regulations are being increased and software vendors are being held responsible. So software vendors will be facing some penalties. So let's take a look at what exactly is a software supply chain attack, how it operates, and what kind of impact it has. A software supply chain attack is the act of compromising a software app or one of its components, one of its dependencies during development cycle or during delivery or during its usage. So how does such an attack happen? The hacker, that is the attacker, manages to somehow gain access to the dev environment and the software build infrastructure. For example, the build servers, the artifact repository, the open source repository, the the version control system for the source code, etc. And what is the impact? It's actually pretty serious. The attacker can modify source code or scripts. They can create backdoors in the app so that at a later time they can steal data. The worst software supply chain attack that happened, and also the most well-known, was the SolarWinds hack of 2020. This hack involved SolarWinds Orion product, which was a very popular product for monitoring network infrastructure, and it was being used by many businesses, including some Fortune 500 companies and also some US federal agencies. This hack exploited Orion's software update process. The hackers spent many months building command and control protocols so that they could have a backdoor malware inserted into the software update process for Orion product. This was distributed to thousands of customers worldwide. And according to SolarWinds, 18,000 out of their 33,000 customers were impacted by this. That is more than half of their customers. The most fascinating point about the SolarWinds hack is that neither the customers nor SolarWinds had any idea about this breach until more than a year after the hackers had initially been able to gain access to SolarWinds build environment. So they were just quietly building this command and control protocol, this backdoor malware that later they inserted into the software updates. So again, let's remember that a software supply chain attack is the act of compromising software or one of its dependencies at any stage throughout its development, delivery, and usage. That means it could be during the development stage, it could be during the integration stage, or it could be during the deployment stage. And finally, it could be during the ongoing deployment updates. And that was the case with SolarWinds. Although the precise attack vector may vary in each case, the attacker usually gains access, unauthorized access to development environments and infrastructure. So here we see examples of what hackers can do at each of these stages. For example, they can do code injection or credential theft in the development phase. They can do open source, software vulnerabilities exploitation in the integration phase. They can they can hijack updates or do reverse engineering of the binaries in the post-deployment updates phase. The key security concerns about software supply chain attacks are threefold. The first one is the injection of malware into software. This is the software that is being developed that may have malware injected into it by the hackers. The second one is that the dependencies for the software that is being developed, the dependencies may end up with malware. These days, all apps use a large number of dependencies, such as web app frameworks or variety of third-party libraries. So, so the second possibility is that in any of these dependencies, malware can be injected. And lastly, the next possibility is the compromise of the CI/CD systems. There are many areas in the CI/CD pipeline where a compromise may happen, and we'll be taking a close look at that. But before that, I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page. So CI/CD, so CI stands for continuous integration, and it includes phases such as planning phase, coding phase, building phase, testing phase, and the release phase. And CD stands for continuous delivery, and the phases are like, deploy phase, operate phase, monitor phase, etc. Again, we'll be taking a closer look at these shortly. So to recap, the first two concerns involve the integrity of the software app that is being developed. So let's call this the internal code, and the software app's dependencies, such as the open source and third-party packages. So let's call this the external code. So now let's take a look at how we can assure the integrity of both internal and external code. There are three practices that are recommended by Gartner for protecting the integrity of internal and external code. The first one is version control policies. The second one is utilizing component registries. And the third one is third-party software risk management. So let's take a look at each one. So the first one is strong version control policies. So for integrity of internal code, that is the code that is being developed by the development team, it's very important to use a modern version control system which has built-in security controls. Good example is GitHub or GitLab. And once you use such a system, then utilize the various security controls to the max. For example, enforcing access policy controls, branch protection policies, etc. Next thing is to ensure that the code doesn't contain any sensitive data hard-coded. For example, you don't want passwords or API keys hard-coded in the code. There are secret repositories that can be utilized for this purpose. So the source code control system, the version control system, should be used to scan for sensitive data, and these should be promptly removed from the code. Another recommended practice is to mandate code reviews, either automated code reviews or manual code reviews. Next is to utilize a SAS tool. So SAS is static application security testing. So using a SAS tool to perform static code analysis is important. It's best to incorporate SAS code scanning into the VCS code check-in process so that code scanning takes place at entry point into the system. There are many SAS tools that incorporate nicely into the build environment, so you have many choices there. Next is to perform DAST. DAST is dynamic application security testing and also fuzz testing. So it's best to perform DAST and fuzz testing on an ongoing basis as opposed to on an ad hoc basis. That means that it's best to integrate the DAST tool and fuzz testing tool into the build process. So RidgeBot is a great DAST tool, which is fully automated, and it can be utilized to it can be utilized as part of the build process. RidgeBot also performs fuzz testing while it attempts to exploit various vulnerabilities such as buffer overflow and SQL injection. The second recommendation is to utilize artifact repositories. This helps to enable securing and versioning and also distributing software packages. It's good to use these repositories for both internally built and also the external artifacts, such as the third-party libraries and also containers. These days, containers are quite popular, so it's good to use a repository for container images as well. The repositories basically act as a trusted source for the sanctioned artifacts and also the software components and the containers. Notice repositories are recommended for both artifacts and containers, as I mentioned. So, so using a container repository these days is quite important. Now, the recommendation from Gartner is, again, to perform DAST and fuzz testing on the components, such as the open source packages. Again, RidgeBot can be utilized very effectively here. I want to mention that RidgeBot provides a specific scenario, a third-party framework security testing scenario with large number of plugins to look for specific vulnerabilities in these third-party app frameworks. Some examples are a suite of Apache frameworks such as Struts2, JBoss, WebLogic, Spring Framework, etc. Out of the 3 practices recommended for ensuring integrity of both internal and external code, we've talked about 2 of them so far. That means a version control system and trusted component repositories. The next recommended practice is third-party software risk management. The third-party software supply chain risks fall into 2 different categories. The first category refers to the risks that are as a result of a known vulnerability in an open source dependency. For example, the RCE vulnerability, the remote code execution vulnerability in Apache Struts2, was utilized, was taken advantage of by the Equifax attackers. The second category is risks as a result of backdoors that are implanted in the externally procured software, such as the SolarWinds attack that we talked about. So what can we do about such risks? Basically, in a nutshell, we can ensure we work with reputable software suppliers. For example, we can look for software suppliers that have certain security certifications, such as the ISO 27034, and also those suppliers who are open to having their build process audited. Not much else we can do. So again, let's keep in mind that it's really important to work with reputable software suppliers. All right, so just to reorient us, let me go back to the slide that I showed at the beginning. The key concerns about software supply chain attacks. We've talked so far about the top two, the first two concerns, and now we will shift our focus to concern number 3, which is the CI/CD system. Now, there are 3 important practices for strengthening the security of the software supply delivery pipeline. The first one is to utilize secret management systems for protecting secrets that I talked about earlier, such as the credentials and API keys. The second one is to implant, to include signing and hashing to ensure integrity of the source code. And the third one is to configure security controls in the CI/CD pipeline. So just in the interest of time, we will not get into the details of secret management or signing and hashing, and we will just focus on the CI/CD pipeline. All right, so nice diagram here. This shows DevOps being a continuous cycle. So in this diagram, we are showing Dev, that is the development team on the left, and Ops, that is the IT operations on the right. These are not silos. They are connected, as you can see. And, we should remember that DevOps came into existence to emphasize that the walls between Dev and Ops teams must be torn down. And of course, DevOps main promise is to have rapid iteration and development, which would lead to continued innovation. And it's become extremely popular, as you already know. So on the Dev side, just real quick, you can see that we have planning, creating, verifying, pre-production, trial, and then we have release. That means release to Ops. And on the Ops side, we have release, that is receive the release from Dev. That's where we begin. Then we have configuration, we have detection, respond, predict, and adapt. In general, it's always a little bit easier to think of a web app when we go through this cycle, but it's important to keep in mind that the DevOps cycle is not limited to web apps. It also works for regular apps. Now, I want to bring your attention to 2 special loops in this diagram. On the Dev side, you can see that we have a create verify loop with a comment that says monitoring and analytics. This refers to the unit testing that happens by the dev engineer, the feature testing that happens by the QA engineer, and the pen testing or any other kind of security testing that happens by the security engineer. And of course, these days, all of the 3 are as much as possible automated, not necessarily done manually by a dev engineer, QA engineer, or security engineer. So, so this happens during the continuous integration, the CI side of the diagram. And now we shift focus to the right side, the Ops side. you see again, there is a loop. This is a detect respond loop. And again, it has a similar comment, monitoring and analytics. So this refers to the ongoing monitoring of the app when it's being used by customers. Let's take a closer look at DevOps and its security challenge. So again, DevOps emphasizes that the walls between the development team and the IT operations must be torn down as much as possible. And again, the key goal is a mutual goal is to have increased speed of delivery and also continued innovation. So the challenge is that this increased speed poses some security challenges. So security, of course, must match the required speed of DevOps, which is, of course, based on rapid iteration and development. But at the same time, security should not in any way be sacrificed or toned down as a result of this higher speed. So basically what happens is, in order for this to happen, a new mindset and new technologies and processes are required. So let's take a look at that. So Gartner actually captures the required mindset and technologies for DevSecOps very clearly. So I just want to read a few key bullet points verbatim, and then we will respond to each afterwards. So traditional application security approaches rely on heavyweight, one-time gating inspections, typically performed late in testing, taking days, if not weeks, and requiring security professionals to perform them. Now, notice that here I've made some keywords bold and some of them highlighted. So that is from me, not from Gartner. The second bullet point is that this won't scale for DevSecOps. The third bullet point, DevOps emphasizes continued feedback throughout the process and improved automation. And the last point is that security needs to adopt and support a mindset where security starts at the very beginning of service creation and throughout the DevOps processes, and is continuous, automated, and improves with each subsequent iteration. So now let's take a look at each one and see how Ridgebot can perform to each point. So for the first point, Ridgebot basically offers an ongoing pen testing, or in general security testing, such as DAST, as opposed to a one-time testing that happens at the very end of the project. So this is very important, ongoing security testing throughout the cycle. The second point is that Ridgebot takes hours and minutes as opposed to days and weeks. So given that Ridgebot is a piece of software, it is tireless, it can work 24/7, and it doesn't require any help from security professionals in order to do its job. You know, once you configure it, then you just let it do its work, and then you look at the result at the end. The next point is that Ridgebot can be easily integrated into the DevOps processes. It offers a rich REST API, and it can be invoked by various parts of the DevOps process. And lastly, Ridgebot can be scheduled to perform pen testing continuously. And as I mentioned earlier, it is fully automated. So these are the two keywords that were also used by Gartner. They're saying that continuous and automation is required. So that's part of the new mindset and the new technologies needed. So before I move on to the next slide, I would like to take a minute to do a survey here. So let me So are you able to see the poll? Everybody's seeing the poll? Okay, looks like it. So let's take a minute to do this poll together. A total of 4 questions, as you can see. I see some answers are trickling in. So far I see for the first question, 33% of the responders are saying that they have been a victim of software supply chain attack. So that's very significant. Also, I see that regarding the second poll question, it's really good to see that many of you are utilizing various security tools, SAST, DAST, IAST, and pen testing. Actually, I see 75% of you are utilizing pen testing. That is very good. We'll take one more minute. Regarding the last question, which of the following ticketing systems you use? So I see many of you use Jira, but also I see 62% use others. So it would be very, we would be very interested to know what other tools you use. So perhaps you can send that information to us offline. That would be great data point for us. In addition to Jira, GitLab, ServiceNow, what other tools you use? All right, so we have, I don't see any more. Okay, I see one more response just came in. Let's just wait for 15 more seconds and then I would end the poll. Okay, one more response just came in. All right, so let me end the poll. So I'm sharing the results so you can see that 20% of you have been a victim of software supply chain attacks. That's significant. So it, you know, as we saw at the beginning, the data point, it's on the rise. It can happen to anyone. The second question, again, it's very heartwarming to see that you utilize all the tools listed, all the security tools, SAST, DAST, IAST, and also pen testing. And it's very good to see pen testing in particular. 67% of you use pen testing. And do you have automated security testing as part of your software development lifecycle? So I see there's some room for improvement. So here, 67% say no. So definitely, we should have a conversation offline. You know, you can utilize Ridgebot. Ridgebot is fully automated, and it can help in various phases of CI/CD pipeline. And the fourth question, as I mentioned earlier, it's very interesting to see that 60% of you use other tools than the 3 listed here for bug tracking. So we would be very interested in knowing more about that. So let's get that information from you offline. So let me stop sharing the poll. And I will get back to the presentation. All right, so we finished this slide earlier, so let's move on. Okay, so let's talk about shift left, the move to shift left security. So when we were going over the DevOps continuous cycle, I mentioned about the 2 monitoring and analytics loops. One was on the left side, which was the dev cycle. The other one was on the right side, which is the ops cycle. So both of these test cycles are very important. However, as a result of the agile methodology, which is very popular among software development teams, and also the rapid iteration and development cycle, a good number of security tests have shifted left to the development side. So what does that mean? That means that vast part of security testing is no longer being considered as a post-development activity. Rather, it is being done as part of the development cycle. So that means that security testing has moved to the realm of the developer. This is something that we weren't seeing before, or we weren't seeing as much of it. Now, with all the shift left that we see, developers at early stages are discovering security problems. So, so as a result of this, security testing has become faster, it has become more effective, and also it has become less expensive. Why is that? Because just like other aspects of software testing, the earlier the bugs are detected and addressed, the less expensive they are. So the earlier the security flaws are detected and brought to the attention of the developers, the more effective the process is, and of course, the less expensive it is. So this shift left doesn't happen by itself. It requires security tools that can rise to the occasion and be seamlessly integrated into the DevOps process, into the CI/CD pipeline. Security tools that are automated and don't require human intervention. And again, security tools that can be easily integrated into the DevOps process, for example, via REST API. And last point is that security tools that can also use commonly used bug tracking tools that are used by developers, such as Jira, GitLab, etc. So to recap, detecting security flaws as early as possible in the DevOps process is the goal of shift-left security testing. And Ridgebot is a great example of a security testing tool that meets all the relevant requirements. So DevOps toolchain refers to the DevOps continuous cycle that we saw earlier, and it's annotated at each step with specific security-driven actions that can be taken using various security tools. So this is from Gartner, and I want to mention that, let me just do a click here. I want to mention that Ridgebot can be used as part of the monitoring and analytics phase on both the dev side, which is what we're looking at now, and the ops side. So on the dev side, you can see DAST, IAST specifically, and on the ops side, you can see pen testing. Security testing tools that are automated and integrated with popular DevOps tools are required, as I just mentioned. Ridgebot is a good example of this. It can be integrated with build systems such as Jenkins and Ansible. We have working examples of this. I just want to mention that there is no integration needed on Ridgebot side. The only thing that we will be providing is some reference implementations for both Jenkins and Ansible. So you can see how Ridgebot can be invoked from Jenkins or from Ansible. On the issue tracking side, however, integrations are required. We have already completed integration with Jira, and also with GitLab, and integration with ServiceNow is in progress. We will have that shortly. So, and again, we are very interested in other tools that you may be using for issue tracking purposes. So at this point, I want to share the result of a survey that was done by Gartner to rank various tools that were used during development phase to secure web apps. the survey shows 3 types of tools, namely DAST, IAST, and automated pen testing as being popular or gaining momentum. Now, given that this survey is from 2021, if a similar survey were to be taken today, the numbers likely would be more in favor of this. Again, I want to point out that Ridgebot is a great fit for the 3 categories that are marked by the green arrows, DAST, IAST, and also the others category, automated pen test. So Ridgebot is a good security tool to use during the development cycle. Now, changing the focus to the production cycle. So again, this was a similar survey that was done by Gartner to rank various security tools for the production cycle. Again, the survey shows that 3 types of tools were popular, DAST, IAST, and automated pen testing. And just as before, as in previous slide, Ridgebot is a good fit because we covered these 3 areas. So to kind of summarize why Ridgebot is a perfect tool for DevSecOps, just a few bullet points. I won't go over every bullet point that I have listed here, just go over some of them. Want to mention that Ridgebot has full support for OWASP vulnerabilities, and it generates a nice OWASP top 10 compliance report, which you see on the right-hand side. So you see at the bottom of the report, we are showing the for example, right here, you see 4 out of the 10 categories, the A1 through A10. The rest of them are on the next page. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, we have a rich REST API, and it can be utilized for integration into the CI/CD pipeline. We support Swagger, and we are always open to feedback that you may have about our REST API, so we continue to evolve it as needed. And I mentioned about the other bullet points throughout the presentation. So continuation of these bullet points, why Ridgebot is the perfect fit for DevOps. Ridgebot does not have false positives in our risk reports. The risk reports that we generate, basically, we have already validated the vulnerabilities by having exploited them. So there are no false positives. So everything that we report in our risk findings, they require an action. They require to be mitigated. And the next point I want to point out is that as I alluded to earlier, we have a third-party framework pen testing scenario, which focuses on detecting vulnerabilities in very popular frameworks that are being utilized while developing web apps these days, such as various Apache frameworks, JBoss, WebLogic, Spring Framework, etc. So, here we are showing in the screenshot just a small number of small subset of the large number of the plugins that we have for each of the vulnerabilities in these frameworks that we are capable of detecting. And in the final slide to capture this, key bullet points why Ridgebot is a perfect fit for DevSecOps, just emphasizing that Ridgebot can be utilized very effectively for the shift-left security that I talked about earlier, and the integration that we have with tools such as Jira and GitLab and very soon ServiceNow. So here we are showing in a screenshot that you create an object, for example, for Jira in Ridgebot. Then when you're creating a task to do the security testing, you specify you enable the DevSecOps connector that you see here. You enable this option, and then you select the Jira server, and then you can say that you want Jira tickets to be created every time we discover a risk, or every time there's a high CVSS score vulnerability that's discovered, etc. So it's fully configurable, and we will see this in our live demo. So in fact, this is a good time for me to switch to the demo. So let me log in here. All right, so we're looking at the main screen where we show the list of all the tasks, all the security testing tasks that have been running. So, so these are the tasks that have already completed. So yesterday I ran a task to perform pen testing of this particular website. Many of you recognize this. This is testphpvulnweb.com. It's a it's being hosted by Acunetics. It has many known vulnerabilities, in particular SQL injection. So let's go to the process of creating a new task. So I create a new task here. I call it website pen testing, and I put this URL there, and that is the target that I want to attack. Now, so here I enable DevSecOps connector option, and then I select, I have already configured a Jira server here, so I select that, and then I specify a project. There are two projects in Jira, so I select the first one, security tasks, and then I select an issue type. So in Jira, as you know, you can have tasks, subtasks, and other type of entities. So I select task, and here, in order to not generate too much traffic or too much noise or too many tickets, I should say, I say just create a ticket every time you discover a risk that is a vulnerability that we are able to successfully exploit. And now I say, go ahead and run this. So our task is running. And while this task is running, I will just quickly generate a report for similar task that I ran yesterday. So in this report, I will select the OWASP Top 10 2021 flavor, and I generate the report. Let's take a quick look at our report, which is wrapping up as we speak. All right, so let's do one thing while this is finishing. Let's take a quick look at our task to see how it's doing. So our task is running. Notice that the security score that we have for it, now it's gone down. So if I open the task and I go to the summary page, we can see that we have completed 567 jobs out of 860, and we have already discovered 4 risks, and it became 5. So you see that we have discovered number of SQL injection vulnerabilities. So here we're providing evidence that indeed we were able to get some sensitive data. So we got some tables, such as the users table, and we can get the schema. Again, we don't do anything nasty with the data. We just provide it as evidence that this is a serious vulnerability that we were able to detect. So our task is almost done. Now let's take a look at the report. The report is also done. Let's download it. I will not encrypt it right now in the interest of time. I'll just download it so we can take a look at it live right here. So I'll just bring your attention to this section. So this is the executive summary where we show we successfully exploited 5 vulnerabilities. We found 36 CVSS score, etc. And here is our OWASP top 10, we are showing for each category how many vulnerabilities were discovered, etc. And then down below, we are showing detailed information. We are showing the detailed kill analysis. Let's see, this is not an exciting. The first one is a weak password. Let's look at the next one, which is SQL injection. We are showing the detailed kill analysis, kill chain analysis, how Ridgebot was able to exploit this vulnerability. So let's go back to our tool here, and this task is done. So I will just refresh. So we are done here. So let's go to Jira. So in Jira, as of yesterday, when I ran the test, the issue that I had created had an ID sec-44. So let's refresh our page. And now you see sec-47. So this just got created. You see the time is right now. And if we open one of them, you can see. So so here you can see for SQL injection, we created a ticket in the Jira, and the ticket now can be assigned to someone to work on it. I'll go ahead and assign it to Robert, and so we're all set. So let's go back to our presentation. So we've covered this slide, and the final slide is a comment by Steve McConnell, the author of the legendary book Code Complete. This is a very well-known quote that he made. He said, "In software, the chain isn't as strong as its weakest link. It's as weak as all the weak links multiplied together." So that's quite significant. So in software, we want to take each weak link very, very seriously. So with that, we are done with our presentation, and it's time for our Q&A. So let me just take a look. All right, so there is one question about what if our DevOps environment, DevSecOps environment is running in a behind a proxy server. So it's a very timely question. Actually, we are currently working on our next release where we support both HTTPS type of proxy as well as SOC 5 proxy servers. So with that, if your environment is fully proxied, then there should be no problem. In the past, there were some challenges, working in fully proxied environments, but with the new upcoming version of release of Ridgebot, there should not be any problem because we natively support HTTPS proxy servers as well as SOC 5 proxies. And one question, I should have actually addressed this as part of the presentation. It's about what happens if a new vulnerability is discovered after you deploy Ridgebot. So the answer is actually quite simple. Just like when you have antivirus on a regular basis, you keep modifying, you keep enhancing your list of, the library of viruses by the vendor. Similarly, we have a library of plugins. Each plugin basically focuses on scanning for a given CVE, for a given vulnerability or a family of vulnerabilities, and also for exploiting that given CVE or family of related CVEs. And on an ongoing basis, we are delivering new vulnerabilities, or I should say new plugins. So the plugin library continues to evolve. Every 2 weeks, we release a new plugin library. So when new vulnerabilities are discovered, then it's just a matter of us releasing a new version of our our plugin library. And even though we release it every 2 weeks, but when a new vulnerability, when an important vulnerability is discovered, and we take it quite seriously, we release it as quickly as possible. For example, when Log4j vulnerability came out, then within a few days, we had a release of our plugin library, because everybody was scrambling at that time trying to see whether they were impacted by Log4j or not. So we release the plugin library as quickly as possible when there is an important vulnerability that's discovered. Otherwise, every 2 weeks, we have new plugins that are included, and sometimes we enhance existing plugins. All right, so I want to thank you again for your time. It was a pleasure sharing this information with you. And Mansi, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Hom, for sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you to everyone who attended this webinar. We hope that you found this session informative and useful in your own work. We'll share the recording of the session to your email. And if you have any further questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to us to this email I'm sharing on the chat right now. So we look forward to connecting with you again in the future, and thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.